abstract is page 2. It's a brief, comprehensive summary of the contents of the article. Usually you write your abstract last because the abstract is a summary of your study. It can contain no citations. It stands alone. So that's usually one of the last things you write. Okay, headings. Since, to me, that's very important. Students have not done particularly well on a paper they've given me because they use no headings, just paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. In APA, there are 5 levels of headers. Number 1, main level heading is centered and bold. Number 2 is flush left and bold. Number 3 is flush left and italicized. So see, you can divide your information down so everyone can understand it. Number 4 is indented. The same number that you indent to begin your paragraph is indented bold with a period at the end. This is all in your APA manual. Number 5 is indented italicized with a period. So you have 5 different levels that you can use to explain your information. Again, this is in your APA manual. There's a lot of guidelines in the APA manual. I really don't see a lot of need to talk a lot about that. You'll be able to read that and apply that. It's very gender neutral language. It's sensitive to labels. It's very sensitive to racial and ethnic identity and disabilities and age. So that's something that you'll want to look at. Your references should be APA style. That is important. And you're going to, just like I do, I've been in this 30 years, I still have to look it up for some things, for APA references. So make sure they are double spaced. I get papers all the time. And they have single spaced the references. You double space the references just as you do the text and the paper, and you follow APA style for those. Plagiarism. Most plagiarism is unintentional. Most people don't mean to do it. I wrote a Christian fiction novel. Such fun to do that. And all the way through. Now, this was a novel. I would think, oh my gosh, is this plagiarism? And I was making it up. It was fiction. And, but did I hear this somewhere? Of course, you're filled with knowledge that you've gotten all along in your life. But you need to make sure that if you are copying material from someone else's material, that you cite it. Usually try your best to paraphrase. It's best to paraphrase rather than have an actual quote. If you're quoting, it should be idiosyncratic to the author. In other words, it's so important what they said that I cannot paraphrase it. We already talked about using quotations, making sure that it's something you really need to do. But again, it's fine. If you need to quote it, you need to quote it. All you have to do is cite it in the references and put the correct citation in the text. The bibliography management, which is the references, I have never used software. There is software out there, and you'll find that in your PowerPoint if you would prefer to use software. I just type it, but I'm a really good typist, so I've not used software. But there is software out there if you prefer to use software to do your references. The art of writing. Writing is a skill. I was a terrible writer 30 years ago. Terrible. The more you write, the better you get at it. And the main thing that you need to remember it from writing is use direct, clear, concise language and edit, edit, edit. If you do that, you'll learn, again, as you write, you'll get better and better at writing, but make sure that you edit. Use simple sentences, well-formed paragraphs. Paragraphs should never be 2 pages long. You present an idea in a paragraph, and then you begin another paragraph. It should be clear, well-organized, and readable. Okay, defining the variable. We're going to switch now from talking about the lit review to some aspects of defining the variable. Remember, I talked about the variables were either dependent or independent. A variable, we've defined it before, is a trait, attribute, or characteristic that varies. It can vary within each person over time or be constant within a person, but vary across individuals. A constant variable is something like eye color, native language, childhood experiences are constant with each individual. And so I can't change my eye color. Well, I think you can now. I saw the other day there's some kind of drops you can put in there. I wouldn't do it, but you can change it. But for the most part, it is a constant variable. I mean, it's it's a constant variable. Now, variable variables are things like age, weight. Don't you wish weight stayed the same all the time? But it doesn't. Talkativeness, mood, net worth. Your net worth can change. And energy level. Those are all variables that can change across time. Okay, variables can be numerical because we're talking about quantitative and qualitative. We'll talk a lot more about that. Styles of research. If the variable is numerical, you can find a numerical score. The Beck Depression Scale, you actually get a numerical score. Or they can be categorical. Gender, male, female. Religious association, you may have 5 different categories, but they're still categorical. And you can determine how the characteristics are measured or categorized. Some variables are categorized with numerical values and show differences in amounts. So numerical, and I like using numerical values. And you can mix the two. You can have a categorical variable within your study along with numerical values. They can be manipulated, selected, independent, or dependent. I know y'all have all heard independent and dependent variables because the dependent variable causes changes to the dependent variable. Always remember, the dependent variable is the problem. The independent variable is the treatment. And so our purpose of research is to see if our independent variables can have a cause and an effect upon our dependent variable. Now, are they selected or are they manipulated? Selected is the researcher chooses an intervention that is already being implemented. Let's say you're looking at alcoholism among a certain group. It's going to have to be a selected variable, alcohol abuse, because you certainly don't want to manipulate it and tell them, okay, I want you to drink more and let's see how it affects you. or drink less. You're going to have to select that variable. Manipulated variables are controlled, created, applied, enforced, or enacted, and that's what you use most of the time. They're going to be your treatment. They're going to be controlled, and you're going to manipulate that on how you apply that to your dependent variable. Operationalizing a variable and population issues. Remember, operationalizing is nothing more than defining the variable. Because it's so important to define it. Let's say you're using the variable anger. You're going to have to exactly tell people, what do you consider anger? Some people may consider anger one thing, and some people may consider it aggression. How you define that. And you have the leeway to define it however you want to define it for your particular study. Remember, we talked about quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative has to do with numerical values, which most people do quantitative studies. When we talk in depth about qualitative studies, you'll see the length of time it takes to do that. But a quantitative sample, which is using numerical values, is representative, random, and generalizable. It's representative of the sample you want, adolescents. It's random if it's the best way you can do it. Remember, I told you there's other ways to choose your sample. And it's generalizable. Oh, I'm going to read this study, and this is going to apply to every high school student in America. It's very generalizable. Now, a qualitative sample represents specific case example because it's very narrative and very storytelling. And we're going to look at single case study designs and specific case samples. The specific population to be represented is called your target population. Your sample size. How many participants do you have to have? Well, if there's a strong relationship is suspected, let's say you were looking at self-esteem and you were also looking at depression as variables. You would not expect a strong relationship between self-esteem and depression. So you would probably need more participants to make sure your study was generalizable. But if you had too many participants, you may result in finding misrepresentative significance. If you have 5,000 people, I'm really not sure what kind of results you'd come up with. Smaller relationships, like I just talked about, might require a larger sample size. But I will tell you this, most inferential statistics give you a formula or bounds on what kind of sample size you would need to have. All right, your instrumentation. Remember what I talked about my study, wellness. I had to have a way to collect that data, so I had to go out there and find an instrument that would collect it, and I was doing quantitative, so I wanted to be able to have a score. So I found someone who had an instrument on wellness, but I also needed at-risk status for high school dropout. Found someone in Alabama that had created an instrument with a score that had that exact thing. When will you collect your data? You just decide and make a plan about when and how you're going to collect it and who's going to collect it. So just following through, knowing exactly how you're going to do it, when you're going to do it. There's lots of different measurement types for the researcher. as I told you, Mental Measurement Yearbook has has tons of different instruments that you can use. There are rating scales, interview schedules, observation forms, flow charts, performance checklist. I could go on and on of the different types of instruments there are out there. And once you decide on your research question, that's why it's important to get that, then you're going to start researching to see how you can find a way to measure your variables. You'll hear me say that over and over again. Yes, but how are you going to measure that? I have students come to me, oh, I've got this idea. I'll do this and this and this. And I'll go, yes. And how are you going to measure that? So measurement of your instrument is very, very important. Again, like I said, I found this instrument in Alabama, and I drove over there and said, tell me about your instrument. Now, a lot of times they will want to grade the instrument because guess what? They want the knowledge of how the instrument worked for you. And so, but they'll send you the data back, and they didn't charge me anything. So money is another thing, the cost of the instrument that's involved. Okay, I'm gonna end talking about this. There's participant bias in research, and so we're going to talk about some specific areas. The Hawthorne effect. The notion that participants in an experimental group are motivated to perform better when they know they're being studied for research. Now, this is all based on the 1920s Western Electric plant in Chicago. They were doing research on lighting to see how lighting affected their workers. They found out it didn't matter what they did with the lighting. If they increased it, decreased it, made it different, just because they were being studied, they performed better. Then we have the John Henry effect. This is the proposal that participants in a control group compete to outperform participants in the experimental group. So that's an extraneous variable you have to think about. And this is based on John Henry tried to outperform a steam drill. He said as a person, he could compete with a steam drill. And so this is what this is named after. So the control group is going to try to do better than your other group that's actually getting in the experimental group just because they want to. They want to compete. Then you have experimenter bias or experimenter effects. This is when a researcher unintentionally influences participant behavior ratings or study outcomes. You don't mean to do it. Maybe you say something or do something, and they think, oh, I think she really wants me to mark this on that. So you get experimenter bias. Then you get observer bias. And that is when the participants infer what is expected of them, so it may affect performance. This is kind of the Pygmalion effect. If I expect everyone to do well, everyone's going to rise to a higher level and they're going to do better. And then the last is the halo effect. The halo effect is a trait of the researcher influences the study. Maybe they just like the way you look. And so I'm going to do better on this. I'm going to try harder. Maybe they don't like the way you look. Maybe there's something about you, so they just don't participate, or they have participate. So that's called the halo effect. So there's a lot of things to think about when you're doing a research study. A lot more goes into it than most people think. And so those are areas that we talked about samples and different aspects of the study and some of the issues with related literature. There's a good bit there that people don't realize about making sure you get the correct related literature and that it helps you produce a study that is generalizable and can be respected in the counseling community.